wrong. It's also a culture to where if a person makes a mistake, they can own up and say, hey, I think I messed this up, I made this mistake, and there's an understanding that like the hammer just won't drop on them. It's not to say that all mistakes we just look the other way. It's to say that each individual error or mistake is looked at in context and determined where the breakdowns and deficiencies were, recognizing that people are going to make mistakes. It's processes that break down to where people, that escape gets through, and so that whatever it needs to be to contain and shore back up that process is adhered to. For instance, it could be retraining, it could be identifying that a tool is insufficient, but it's not just that, hey, somebody did something wrong, let's punish the individual. It's bigger than that.
And I do think it was the right call that we not do the safety culture survey, given everything that was going on with the work stoppage. And even coming back from a work stoppage, you're in a different place than you were in September of 2023. One question about that, I know that Boeing has been doing its own safety culture surveys. I would just, without asking a question on that, encourage them to continue on with that in their review and implementation of measures to improve safety culture within their organization. We do have a recommendation on this, and one thing I'll ask is Section 103 of the Aircraft Certification Safety and Accountability Act of 2020 directed the FAA to convene an expert panel to review and make findings and recommendations on the safety management processes and their effectiveness for each holder of an ODA for the design and production of transport airplanes. The expert panel's membership composition was designated by law and included a combination of NASA, FAA, aviation labor, aviation industry, and independent experts. While most aspects of ODA are focused on design and certification, the panel's focus on safety culture, SMS, and ODA applies across Boeing. Do you know what the expert panel found, and what are the benefits of a neutral third party, such as a independent panel like this? How can they help improve safety and safety culture for Boeing?
So I'm going to answer your question kind of in reverse. So the benefit of a third party is that it takes out the bias. Sometimes it's very hard for us to assess ourselves. And so you need that third party, independent, fresh eyes, if you will, to be able to come in and identify the issues that might be within the organization. Now, as to what that team found, we've actually talked about quite a few of them because some of those things they found have persisted and some of the things that NTSB staff has also found. The first is that there's a very big disconnect between the executive level of Boeing, the higher level management, what they know and what they appreciate, and what the actual technicians on the floor understand and appreciate. That gap absolutely has to be bridged and filled in order for their SMS to work. Another thing that they identified was the fact that, and I think this, again, kind of harkens back to the growing pains, is that the attempts to install SMS within the system are very complex. It's not to the level to where just an average person is going to understand it and be able to go to a training and be able to understand what their role is and do the thing that they're supposed to do. So they need to shore up that part. There wasn't a lot of consideration for, interestingly enough, human factors. And that is where I've said before that, like, for instance, in the production rate change assessments that they would do, it was very focused on the quality side. You know, do I have enough people? Are there enough tools in place? And not quite as focused on some of those intangibles, like, are my people actually trained to do this job? That would be a human factors issues. Having enough people is great, but are the people qualified, proficient to do the job? That is another aspect. That's a part that needs to be developed in that SMS side, and then again bridged to the QMS side so those things meet. All of those things are what that independent panel found, and all of those things are largely what we found to persist when we did our investigation.
Yeah, and it would be interesting to see what's changed since then. Member Graham, Member Chapman, Member Inman.
Yeah, so I want to go back into a little bit of the FAA's oversight again. You know, can someone document specifically the flaws with their compliance and enforcement activities that may have resulted in this?
So based on staff's investigation, there were a lot of issues with regards to the removals and what they found during the removals. Again, they only had 5 years with regards to keeping all those records. The compliance are basically regulatory violations that they were supposed to keep. So based off of that, they were unable, the work program asked them to look at the previous issues with regards to any systemic issues with regards to the removals, and that wasn't happening, and that was the case that we found, that they weren't looking at or auditing the things that they needed to audit at that time.
But it goes back, I mean, I think we actually talk about it in the report, that in 10 years previously, that the Boeing's BPIs had a history of compliance issues. I mean, despite there being that going on, why did it continue for 10 years?
It's because that they don't have the system wasn't in place for them to be able to look at all that information back then, to be able to drive the audits at that time.
So they were ineffective in their oversight.
Correct.
Do you think they're effective in their oversight now?
There potentially could be holes in their oversight, sure.
It's a very good answer. Potentially could be holes. If the FAA had an opportunity to make a specific change this year in one area, what would that be in order to gain less holes in their oversight?
Their risk-based assessment tool needs to be a lot better.
So you think that there's a fault in the risk-based assessment? I think that's what the IG found as well, correct?
Correct.
So it's us and the IG are both recommending this.
Correct.
Okay. Let's talk for a moment about the Shipside Action Tracker, the SAT. FAA's frontline managers stated in their interviews that parts removal out of sequence are chronic within Boeing's production system. So how does the SAT actually play within the assembly of an aircraft? How does the SAT pick up on chronic issues to be able to identify them?
The SAT does not. The SAT is think of it as a trouble ticket system. So when you contact IT and say, my computer doesn't work, they create a ticket. It's specific, that log is specific to what your problem is. That's the same thing a SAT does. So a SAT, in this case, was there's 5 discrepant rivets that we need to get resolved because it's holding up production or the completion of production. So it was there to track progress and status, and it was updated at the end of every shift. So it went along from flow day 1 through flow day 6, I believe, when the initial attempt to sign off the rivets occurred, and when Boeing quality refused to buy off the rivets, and when they said they had signed off that they had been replaced and they actually had been painted over because he thought he addressed them satisfactorily, that the failure of that buyback is exactly what that process should do. It rejected work that was not satisfactory to the QA inspector. So that one worked, but then it continued on after that from flow day 6 all the way to flow day 10, when it's getting ready to roll out the door and people are saying, this is still open, we need help, we need help, we need to get this thing done. So that's what the SAT record showed.
But it sounds to me like SAT is a way to get airplanes out the door so they can be sold.
No, I think SAT is a way to track a single problem from beginning to end so that you have a conclusion. It's not a documentation of the system. In other words, it's not a manufacturing record, but it is a document that tracks what occurred shift to shift.
Okay. Mike had mentioned the move-ready process. I also saw that when I was there, where you know, you get to, at each flow day, they have a banner where they go through certain questions of, did this get completed, did this get completed, did this get completed, and then at the end of the day, the managers and the rank and file get together, the mechanics, and talk about were all those procedures, was everything done? They won't go through those questions, and then they determine, is this ready to go to the next flow day? They had mentioned that this would be caught in flow day 3. We know this went through to flow day 10. Do you believe that, or do you have some concerns it might go beyond that, or it might not catch it? I just want to.
We did not study the move ready process because that was implemented actually after the investigation. What I will say is, I think it's a good start, but once again, failure to document something is very hard to detect. Mm-hmm. So if you don't have it documented that it wasn't done, I don't know that process catches it. Right,
which is why you need a design change. So Mr. Crookshanks, you're up. Boeing intends to pursue a design enhancement for the MED plug door. Can you talk about how that came about? What will the design enhancement do, and where is it in the certification process?
So the design enhancement adds 2 pieces of structure to the plug that will prevent it from moving if they're installed correctly, or if they're in position. And further, you won't be able to put the sidewall panels onto the airplane without having those installed. And additionally, they're going to put lanyards on the bolts so that they'll hang there and be visible to a mechanic that had taken the bolts out. As far as where it is in the process, the engineering's been done. Spirit and Boeing are looking at the planning, the production planning process, and submitting it to the FAA for approval before it will go into production.
Will that design change only apply to new airplanes, or a retrofit as well?
Boeing has told us they intend to issue a service bulletin to retrofit all existing airplanes, and we have a recommendation for them to implement that.
Great. And is there, and I shudder when I ask this question, is there an estimate for how long the certification process will take? Will I be collecting Social Security?
The information we have says that it should be start to be installed in the factory in 2026. So
it's like a rush certification process. Okay. Well, maybe they're making, maybe they've done an SMS or some improvement process for certification that does not take 7 to 10 years. Great. So in the meantime, they have these other procedures in place, which is a good start, right? FAA, I do want to go back to them on inspections. What type of inspections and specifically what I'm asking is not necessarily quality system audit, principal inspector audit, supplier control audit. Most people don't even know what that means. I'm not sure I do. I'm kidding. I do. But are these before this accident? Because I haven't really gotten a good answer, not from us, from FAA. Were inspections announced or unannounced? Or both?
The answer we got during our interviews, they were always announced because they set up with their colleagues at Boeing, time, place, location to meet, and they almost always shared what they were going to look at and where they wanted to look at it. Since then, during the hearing, they said that they will share, they will notify them they want to do an audit, but they're not going to share always what they want to look at or where they want to look at it, so you can't prepare for the test.
Seems like an excellent idea. I mean, I do understand the need to have some announced audits, but unannounced can also give you a better sense of what's really going on a day-to-day basis. Okay, Member Graham. Member Chapman. Member Inman.
I'm going to actually take a moment, I guess, to put a positive spin on something. And I think we often are caught up in tragedies. I know from the DCA midair, what happened in India, we talk about these tragedies, and rarely does anyone ever focus on tragedies that don't happen. So could someone from the team tell me, was this plane certified for ETOPS?
It was.
And that ETOPS is an extended range, flying over water. Does that sound correct?
Correct.
Only reason I bring that up is that I think in this case we should applaud someone who actually adopted SMS before SMS was mandated, and that was Alaska Airlines. Was this plane able to fly under the FAA regulations over water for extended distance?
At the time of the accident, it was not, and I'd like Mr. Hooray to...
Well, wait a second. My question was, under the FAA regulations, were they allowed to fly this?
At the time of the accident, the aircraft was taken off of ETOPS because they were flying with a deferred item on MEL.
The question is, under the ETOPS program, were they allowed to fly under the FAA reg?
Not at the time of the accident, because there was an MEL, they had a deferred item for an MEL which required them to take the aircraft off of ETOPS for that flight. It was a separate item from, from anything that we've been talking about so far. It was they had a fuel pump that was on MEL.
I want you to go back and correct it, because I believe, if I'm correct, and maybe I'm wrong, I apologize, you're the experts, their voluntary SMS program had caught this as being a recurrent item, and so through their voluntary SMS program, they pulled it from ETOPS where they could have still legally flown it under their certification. Does that sound correct?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Under the Alaska Airlines SMS program, they had voluntarily taken this plane off because they saw a recurrent issue. But under the FAA certification for ETOPS, they could have flown.
That is correct. So there were two separate ETOPS there were two separate restrictions for ETOPS going on at the same time. One, the FAA would not allow them to fly. One, the FAA would have allowed them to fly, but the airline had taken it upon themselves to do that before they would let it fly again. So in other words, if they had corrected the issue with the fuel pump that was on MEL, they still would have voluntarily been restricted from flying.
I'm just trying to compliment. A voluntary SMS system that goes above a regulatory authority is a good one. Is that correct?
Yeah, agreed.
Okay. All we had to do was get to yes on that. Sorry.
If I can interject, though,
Yeah.
Alaska Airlines program is a regulatory SMS. It's not a voluntary SMS.
I completely understand, but they actually adopted the SMS before it was regulated. It's more mature, if that's a good way of putting it.
It is.
Okay.
But all Part 121 operators had to adopt full regulatory SMS, I think, in 2012? Question mark.
It's okay. I just want to call out, there's operators out there that are flying, and I know others that are trying to go beyond the mandated level of safety, and for that, we should applaud those, because this could have been a much bigger incident had we seen a door plug over a water or extended range. Luckily, it was in Portland and was able to return very quickly. The circumstances we talk about would have been very much different had not the system worked in certain places. Can we get yes to that from anybody?
I concur.
Thank you. I guess I want to also, one quick thing about this removal, and has to do with rig documents. Whenever you're talking about rig documents, this is how certain members of the team learned how to take the door plug out? I guess is that correct?
A rig document is an IP that checks the door plug for dimensional flushness. So no, it's not a teaching tool. It's a instruction to measure the door plug to make sure it's got proper gaps centered and it is not out in the wind stream. It's underfared for fuel efficiency.
But it's the the team lead, as I understood it, learned how to do this because he had not been trained from reading the rig documents.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. He referred to, the gentleman interviewed referred to the drawings which were used to rig the plug at Spirit. So as I had mentioned earlier, he had very good mechanical aptitude, and he took a manufacturing drawing that had rig tolerances to it and figured out how to take it out and put it back in. He taught himself.
Out of time.
Okay. I want to go back to FAA real quick. Retention of records, because we have a recommendation on this, that includes this. Retention of records documenting noncompliance, as well as having a system that tracks noncompliances, can help certainly proactively identify safety risks. FAA only maintained records at the time of this accident for a period of 5 years. Why is it important for historical compliance enforcement and audit records older than 5 years to be retained and access granted to FAA managers and inspectors? Why is it important to have more than 5 years?
So that inspectors can use that information and use it systematically for next fiscal year's plan for that particular for Boeing.
Yeah, 5 years is a pretty short time period. Do we have a recommendation on how long they should keep those records?
We did not prescribe how long they should keep those records.
Okay. And what is risk-based resource targeting?
It's a tool that the FAA uses to assign risk. Unfortunately, it's not nearly as fancy as it sounds. Once again, Boeing will always be a one high. And what it should be doing is looking at where Boeing's having problems and cause more frequent inspections to occur or audits to occur in those areas where they're actually having problems, and reduce the number of audits in areas where they're not having problems, to be a true risk-based tool.
Well, how do they use it? And just in 23, FAA did determine that Boeing's Renton, Everett, and Charleston production sites were each level 1 high risk. So how do they use that targeting for risk-based analysis?
Again, I believe it's a misnomer. By definition, any manufacturer that produces at least 100 aircraft is a one high. So there's no way of getting to an answer not one high.
Got it. Okay. And my final question for this round for right now, we're going to talk about recommendations at the end here. We do have several other rounds of other questions, but are the recommendations in the report applicable to only Boeing 737 production line, Doug, Mr. Brazy?
No, ma'am, they are not. Many of them are platform agnostic, I guess. They apply to the whole company and not just the 737 line in Renton.
So 767, 777, 787, all the production lines.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Member Graham. Member Chapman. Member Inman.
I've got a few I'll just throw into the catch-all in light of hopefully getting a lunch break in a little bit.
Okay, we're going to get a lunch break right now. That was a big hint. I like it. All right, we're going to take an hour. Is that all right? For lunch. We will reconvene at 2 o'clock. Thank you so much, and thank you to the staff for the work so far.
so much for being here. For our members of the press, we'll go ahead and facilitate a Q&A at the end of our speaking program. During the Q&A, I ask that you identify your name and outlet using the chat function down below, and then also the raise hand function. We'll try to get through as many questions as possible, but we are on a tight time crunch today. So just please be sure to identify your name and outlet, and we'll get through as many as we can. And without further ado, I'll kick it off to Senator Cantwell.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our guests who are participating in this virtual press conference at a critical moment in our country's history. I'm joined today by climbers, hunting and fishing advocates, outdoor recreation retailers, and to say loudly and clearly that America's public lands are not for sale. I would not be fighting for this unless everybody really understood that our economy in the Pacific Northwest, and certainly the U.S. economy, has a thriving $1.2 trillion outdoor retail economy and over 5 million in recreational jobs. So it's easy to say that the value of our public lands has also created a great economy. And why I'm honored to be joined by professionals like professional climber Tommy Caldwell and Graham Zimmerman, Mayor of Boise, Idaho, Lauren McLean, REI Executive and Outdoor Industry Associate Board Member Susan Viscon, and Caden MacArthur representing the backcountry hunters and anglers. So these are the people who know well about the livelihood that I referred to. The proposal we see so far would mandate a sale of 2 to 3 million acres of Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management all across the West. And it would make up to 250 million acres of public lands eligible to be sold across the West. Every Western state, that is, except for Montana, because somehow there's a big sky swindle in the deal. You know, there's no Republican that has said public lands are off the radar here and we won't allow you to sell it, except for one Republican who stood up and instead of saying that and saying that public land shouldn't be for sale, basically just got himself a carve out. So as far as I'm concerned, it's a big sky swindle. Every other Western state, we're here to say that we want our public lands protected. We want to be able to continue to hike, fish, hunt, and do as much as we can. We don't want hunters to face a, quote, no trespassing sign on lands that they've hunted on for generations. We don't want anglers to be blocked from world-class fishing grounds. We don't want places that climbers and hikers and outdoor recreationists have gone to for years, all of a sudden to be turned into luxury resorts or golf courses. They are at their highest and best use, and they are beautiful places that have been preserved for all of the American people to enjoy. So while I appreciate that Senator Lee has been forced to backpedal and is reportedly now trying to shrink the number of available access to these acres, I don't trust him, and I don't trust this process. We will be here to the very last minute, making sure that they do not succeed in putting this into a bill. And if they do, we will be there with an amendment fighting it tooth and nail on the Senate floor. Public lands under this administration are under attack. President Trump said in an executive order, Interior Secretary Burgum said at our public lands meeting that we had regarding the budget process for Interior that public lands are part of our nation's balance sheet. That means he thinks that they're on our balance sheet and should be up for sale. That's why we are here to say no sale of public lands is okay unless it goes through an already defined process. Obviously, things like the Land and Water Conservation Fund and things that have been set up. We obviously improved access to Mount Rainier by doing a land purchase that was really a valuable asset. And there are some things, but no broad sale of our public lands. It's reported that Senator Lee has already sent a new land sale proposal to be included in the Republican budget proposal. We're waiting to hear how the parliamentarian rules on that. We know that they will be writing and rewriting this bill till the very last minute. Washington State could be impacted with a new proposal that would only sell BLM land. For example, the Columbia Basin sagebrush provides some of the best hunting ground in the state. That land could be sold. The Methow Valley, which contributes $150 million annually to Okanagan County's economy, has BLM land with a 5-mile radius of TWISP. The BLM lines the Columbia River, where we go to recreate and enjoy the outdoors. That could be sold to developers for a resort. So I want to make something very important here too, that we do have a high housing crisis, but selling public land will not result in more housing. According to a recent study, selling off federal land, even if it's located near population centers, won't spur housing because there already are vast swaths currently available of land in the same area. So what is more likely to happen is that developers will buy up the choicest proposals and develop them for something else, not affordable housing, something way more expensive. So we know that this proposal that we're fighting today is critically important to Americans all over the United States. We know it's part of our heritage and part of our system, and we know that this is a big no. Our colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle should be making this clear, not getting a carve out from Montana, but clearly saying this is an unacceptable proposal, telling Leader Thune and the President of the United States to take it out right now. But we will continue to fight until the very last I's are dotted and T's are crossed on this legislation and this proposal. Now I'd like to turn it over to professional climber, Tommy Caldwell, who were all so admiring, Tommy, of all your great contributions to the outdoors and your advocacy for the outdoor economy. Tommy.
Thank you so much, Senator. And thank you so much for being such a warrior for this cause and so many others that I deeply, deeply care about. Yeah, I mean, I make my living as an outdoor recreationalist. I climb all over the world, and I'm really still trying to wrap my head around the actual land that's proposed to be sold off. But as I really dig into it, I'm realizing that many of the most profound places in the outdoor climbing world are up for sale, believe it or not. Like the Buttermilks in Bishop, California. This is a place that I've spent vast numbers of time. It largely supports the economy of Bishop in the summer months. There's thousands of people that go climbing from all over the world in this place, up for sale. Shelf Road, I spent my whole childhood at Shelf Road in Colorado. That's up for sale. 10 Sleep, Wyoming, the climbing there supports that town. This would vastly change what I do and my sport. And I suppose in some ways, like if this money was going to go to help with our budget crisis, I could maybe understand making some compromises, but the fact that this is just funding tax cuts seems so crazy to me. And I just want the people on this call to know that this feels very scary and very insane to me. I live in Lake Tahoe nowadays. Where I went hiking yesterday is up for sale on Fallen Leaf Lake. The ski area that I skied at all winter, Kirkwood ski area with my kids, that land and the land surrounding it is up for sale. Like this is vast. It's not about housing. Like most of this stuff is so far from public centers that it's not functional for affordable housing. And so yeah, this is a big deal to me and my community. And I thank you for giving me a moment to speak about it. And I'm here to do whatever I can to help block this.
Thank you, Tommy. And thank you. Thank you for all your great content creation around the outdoors. Really, really appreciate it. Next, we'll hear from Graham Zimmerman, lead of protection of our Winters Climb Athlete Alliance. Graham, thank you for joining us.
Senator, thank you for having me, and I'll echo Tommy. Thank you so much for your leadership on public lands and so many other things that we care about. So my name is Graham Zimmerman. I live in Bend, Oregon, and I grew up just north of Seattle. And for the past 20 years, I've been a professional mountain climber, having taken expeditions to places like the Pakistani Karakoram and the Patagonian Andes. And that's fair to say, I think that those climbs have gone pretty well. We've received a bunch of awards and things like that, including the PLA d'Or, which is the gold medal of alpine climbing. And for me, my journey in climbing started here on American public lands. And these landscapes, they're my training grounds, they're my classroom, they are my inspiration. They've taught me how to climb, how to care for wild places, how to care for people, and for the systems that sustain us. And that's why I care so much about what happens on these places now. To kind of tell a story about public lands a little bit, like I've been climbing all over the world. Some of my proudest moments have been climbing here in the United States on our public lands. In 2013, my partners and I climbed a peak in the central Alaska range called Mount Lawrence. It took about 60 hours of nonstop climbing, and it was a climb that was well received by the international climbing community. And it's a reminder for me that our public lands are world class and they are respected and admired far beyond our borders. And these are also places where I've seen the climate crisis up close, where I've watched glaciers disappear, forests burn, and weather patterns grow more erratic. And now, under budget reconciliation, these lands are being targeted not only for development of expensive housing, like you were discussing, but also for oil and gas development. That's truly trading short-term gains at the cost of long-term damage. And we need to be clear that these public lands are not a spare part of our economy. They are the backbone of a $1.2 trillion outdoor recreation sector, which is it's worth noting that that is up 5% since 2022. And it's a massive contributor to our economy. It's bigger than big pharma, it's larger than oil and gas, and it's a lifeline for the rural communities like mine and Bend that act as gateway communities. And these places power 5 million jobs across the country, supporting family livelihoods and connecting us to something that is bigger than ourselves. So as you mentioned, I'm a part of Protect Our Winners, a community of over 200 professional athletes, one of whom is Tommy. Thank you, Tommy. Scientists, creatives, and brands are also part of that network. And together we advocate for the 180 million Americans who recreate outside each year. And we work to protect public lands, and we work to decarbonize so that we all have the future that we need. And I also need to share that a big part of this for me is as a new parent. I have an 8-month-old daughter, little Sloan. And because of this fight is really personal. I want her to grow up with the same access to clean air, wild landscapes, and public lands that have shaped who I am. So, protect our public lands. Senator, thank you for your work. And thank you for your leadership and for bringing us together to help work towards protecting this foundational component of what it means to be an American.
Well, thank you, Graham, and thank you for participating, and congratulations on Sloan, and what a great legacy we're all fighting for her to have. So thank you so much. We're now going to turn to Boise Mayor Lauren McLean. Thank you so much, Mayor, for being with us.
Well, Senator, thanks for having me, and it's really good to see you. It's funny to follow professional athletes because I am not a professional athlete, but I am the mayor of Boise. I'm also a mom of kids who my daughter, when she was a week old, I schlepped her in on her first walk into public lands. She's 26 now, and she loves nothing more than to come home and bring friends and introduce them to the richness and depth of public lands in our community. I'm the mom of a son who's 21 now. He was born in the winter. He was 1 month old when he got to sled in on his first adventure into public lands. These lands shape us all, as Graham said now about thinking about Sloan and what it means to be a parent and to live in a place that's blessed to be surrounded by public lands, but it shapes our communities. And as mayor of the city of Boise, I'm looking out of my office right now at 2 distinct areas that are put at risk with this proposal to sell off public lands. Just yesterday, a resident said, well, how can they sell them off? They're public, they belong to us. That is the question we should all be asking and that we've got to fight for. Our city is nestled up against foothills open space that is BLM land that turns into Forest Service land, up against a river, and then against a desert. And for over 20 years, we have a legacy of putting forward ballot measures to protect these lands so that they're saved in perpetuity for generations after us. But the system that our residents have created that's right up against our downtown core is at risk because in this proposal, the sell-off of lands would potentially block access to about 11% of the over 200 miles of trails that we have that lead from our city into open spaces. And we're looking at that potential loss of 11%, just under 11%, if BLM land close to town sells, because we've all seen it in Western cities. When land goes private, access is cut off. We stand to lose so much more than what it might even sound like at the time. And we've seen the dangers time and time again, especially as we have more risk of wildfire, of development in open spaces, in our woods, in our open spaces, and here at home in our foothills. And so the removal of lands, putting them in public lands in private hands, increases risks to our communities from wildfire, takes away the very culture and life that all of us that are communities right up against public lands rely on to get outside, to connect, to take advantage of what's in our backyard. It sells off things that belong to every one of us, even if you don't live in a Western community. And here in Boise in particular, these trails will be closed forever. After 25 years of deep work to ensure that we have access to open spaces and trails in perpetuity, this is at risk with this proposal. So I appreciate your leadership. I appreciate the thousands of people in Boise and tens of thousands around the country that are taking action. We've got to keep at it because of the really very real impacts that communities like mine will experience, but that ultimately all of us will experience. When we lose this land, it's gone forever.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. So well said. Thank you so much, and really putting a clear picture about exactly how it affects the city and the citizens of your community. I want to turn now to Susan Viscon, REI Co-op Executive and Outdoor Industry Association Board Member. Thank you for joining us, Susan. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell, for hosting this important call, and certainly all your work in protecting public land, especially in our home state of Washington. Some of my best memories were cross-country skiing with my 1-year-old in a sled behind me in the Methow Valley. So it's terrible to think that these trails could be up for sale. I've been at the co-op for a couple of decades now and been involved with our work around public lands, and currently serve as a Chief New Ventures and Partnership Officer that represents our advocacy work, and also a board member for OIA. At REI, we believe time outside is fundamental to a life well lived, and the stories that you've just heard from Graham, Tommy, and Mary McLean really reinforce the importance of that. Protecting public lands, forests, and waters have been essential to our mission since our founding in 1938, and we really believe these natural places are where our members connect to nature, also where our vendors and partners operate, and where the outdoor community thrives. It is so critical that we remove this dangerous language about public lands from the reconciliation bill, because really, as you heard, public lands belong to everyone. You heard also about the $1.2 trillion outdoor economy. I want to share that just in the American West, the outdoor industry represents more than $177 billion in economic value and supports nearly 2 million jobs. If we sell off public lands, it threatens all of that. And really thinking about how small gateway communities could see this impact. The study out of Eastern Kentucky University talked about Lander, Wyoming specifically. That community thrives on outdoor recreation, and climbing alone in that space generates 4.5 million in annual visitor spend. It supports almost 2 million in local wages, and nearly 30,000 climbers visit that per year. I know Tommy is one of those that goes to that special space. REI, we have 12 million members in the Western states, and those members just don't shop, right? They're really out camping, hiking, paddling, and climbing these lands every day. And for many of them, it's not just about iconic national parks, it's the trails that are right outside their back door. I spent a decade living in Arizona, hiking and mountain biking in the incredible landscape of the Sedona Red Rocks and Coconino National Forests. Yesterday, access to those trails were on the selling block. Losing this would be permanent loss of connection, belonging, and access for our members and the broader community. And protecting is so important, and this is bipartisan. The polls show that Americans overwhelmingly support protecting public lands. And we see that in our own action through our Community Action Network. Our members have already sent 200,000 messages to Congress saying that they must protect these lands. Senator Cantwell, I know you've received many of those, and thank you for the work you're doing around this.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I was able to get out for a few hours yesterday morning at Mount Hamilton, which is in Beacon Rock Park down in Southwest Washington. So, yep, very much appreciated that. A little bit of relief from all of this. Our last speaker before we turn to the press will be Caden MacArthur, representative of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Senator, for hosting this amazing group that highlights the wide range of interests in protecting access to our public lands. Many sportsmen and women that I've spoken to across the country have been able to directly point to places at threat by this maneuver that they hunt and fish on, that they take their families to, they use to enjoy the solace of the outdoors. The latest proposal available to the public makes eligible for sale landscapes that I personally have hunted grouse, elk, mule deer, and pronghorn on, waterways that I fished for trout on since I was a kid with my family. And the loss of public lands really can have significant impacts regardless of proximity to existing communities and development. We hear a lot about this focus on affordable housing and really trying to, in theory, develop public lands closer to existing communities. But those landscapes, as they go away, will further crowd backcountry landscapes. You'll see more trucks at trailheads. You'll see more boots on the same trails as you. And also importantly, many big game species like mule deer really strongly rely on low valley bottoms on the outskirts of existing communities for the winter range that keeps them alive during heavy snowfalls and bad winters. And the loss of many of those low-lying habitats in public lands adjacent to existing communities can directly threaten the viability of those deer herds. In addition to that, more than 80% of critical habitat for big game species like elk is found on public lands in the United States. More than 50% of blue ribbon trout streams are found on public lands in the United States. These landscapes are often vast and intact, and fragmenting them will have irreversible impacts for fish and wildlife. And of course, anyone in the outdoors that recreates, whether they're hunting, fishing, bird watching, and enjoying these intact ecosystems. One talking point you might also hear in conversing about this maneuver trying to sell off our public legacy and our public lands heritage is that locations like national parks are exempt from these proposed sales. So this is only about so-called garden variety public lands. Our national park system in the United States is an incredible asset for the American people, but those lands are preserved in a manner that doesn't allow hunting. And so for the folks in our community, sportsmen and women that enjoy pursuing fish and game, it's these so-called garden variety public lands that are really almost in many ways more valuable than some of the other lands that are exempt from this proposal. And we're trying to make loud and clear to decision makers right now that just because it doesn't have a park status or a similar conservation status does not mean it is not invaluable to the public and to fish and wildlife. At the end of the day, the loss of access is the number one reason that people in America stop hunting and fishing. There are millions of Americans who cannot afford to hunt on private land, cannot afford that access, whether it's their own property or leasing property from someone else. And taking this legacy and selling it off to the highest bidder is the most anti-American deal I can imagine. These public lands are a finite and perpetually undervalued resource, and the worth they have to the public and those that hunt and fish is only going to increase over time to us and future generations.
Thank you so much. Well, now, Sophia, go back to questions. So appreciate that viewpoint, though, protecting for hunting and fishing. So, Sophia.
Wonderful. Thanks all. We'll now transition to our Q&A. I ask again that you use the chat function to identify your name and outlet, and then also raise hand. We'll try to get through as many folks as possible. We're looking at the next 10 minutes to just hammer through as many as we can. But I'll go ahead and kick things off with Bradley Warren with KHQ.
Hi, Senator. Thank you for your time. Real quickly, at the top of this, you referenced the Big Sky swindle. Wondering if you were directly referencing Congressman Ryan Zinke and what action you would have liked that to have been out of the House side. I believe he put in a manager's edit or amendment, if I'm correct. Would you have liked to have seen that be for the whole provision on this conversation and not just the element of Montana? And if please clarify.
Yeah, I serve on the Interior Committee, and I have for 20 plus years. And one of the interesting things about the Interior Committee is you look across to the other side of the aisle, and it's a lot of Republicans. So I know darn well that my Republican colleagues understand the interior of our nation. And the fact that not one of them has the guts to stand up and say, these lands shouldn't be for sale and you should take it out of this bill, and force the leader to do that. That is what Mr. Zinke apparently did in the House. And why aren't they doing the same thing in the Senate? But we have Mike Lee, who is from a big state that benefits from this juggernaut of an outdoor economy, just now trying to change the language and come up with anything possible because he seems determined to meet this goal of putting public lands up for sale, even though there is no economic reason for doing so.
Thank you, Senator.
Awesome. We'll go with Sam Hill from SF Gate next. Sam, oh.
Hi. Sorry, I was muted. I was just wondering if there are any specific areas in the Pacific Northwest that you're most concerned about access being reduced, either very popular or important public lands that fall within this new 5-mile population center rule that they're trying to include?
Well, I think the things, I so love that the mayor of Boise was on because she did a really good job of explaining how hard communities work to integrate, lands and lands access into a larger, whatever you want to call it, tourism, recreational economy, value of quality of life, all sorts of things. And I think places in the Met-Tao or Chelan or parts of central Washington, those would be key areas that I would worry about.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam. Looking for additional questions from folks. If you'd like to just raise your hand over in the chat and we'll get through accordingly. We'll go ahead with Matt Daly at AP.
Okay, well, thank you for having the call. I appreciate it. I guess I just wanted to ask you about in this revised proposal that he has. Do you think that that's something that he's going to continue pushing? And what can you do to kind of say, well, to people who are saying, well, really, this is all done now. It's not in the reconciliation bill, so don't worry about it.
He's already made it clear that he's going to keep trying. And having been here when we did the 2017 tax bill, they were adding zeros to numbers at the very last minute and putting that out without any kind of forethought. So you have no idea what they will try at the 11th hour, and people might just, go along with it. And so that's why we have to get the public awareness and knowledge up that people understand that this proposal could be in a different form and could be proposed. So that's why we're trying to educate people on it.
Wonderful, thanks. We'll go ahead with Laura from the Tacoma News Tribune.
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay, good. I have a quick two-part question here. First, I wanted to ask if there's any lands around the Mount Rainier area or other parts of Western Washington that you wanted to highlight. And then second, I've heard your call to action for Senate Republicans. I'm wondering if you have a call to action for residents as well of how you would see them be involved in this process.
I think first of all, they just don't know that people are talking about this. They don't understand that this is, I've been home the last 3 weekends in a row, and it's clear to me that people are not, people were asking me, well, are they going to get to that big bill sometime this summer? I was like, no, they're getting to it, next week. So they don't understand, and they are concerned. And how can they know when we really don't know? We don't really know these proposals or decisions, and now they're going to try to jam us, and they're really jamming the American people on a resource that belongs to all of them. So I think that what we need is their voices to be heard by their legislators and to talk about the fact that they are paying attention and that they're a big no, a big hell no on selling public land. And I would assume that, areas around, Mount Rainier where there are, I'll get you an example. So you can write about it.
Thank you, Senator.
Awesome. We'll go with Bailey Joe from Sound Publishing next.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, so I have a question about kind of a bit more detail on how this would affect hunters in the area. I understand that it would possibly affect wildlife and habitat, but what would you say is something to really bring across how this would affect people who are maybe a little more conservative and don't necessarily think about how the public lands are for the public, and more think of it for, I need to hunt and shoot and feed myself?
Yeah, well, why don't we let Caden take the first shot at that, and I'll bring in a few things.
Yeah, I'll try and keep it relatively simple. I mean, right, there are places owned by the American public where anybody that wants to go hunt and fish can do so freely at no cost. And the loss of those places is something that I don't think anybody that recreates should accept.
So the sale of those critical lands, for example, in our state, bird hunting or mule deer hunting, on BLM land, which a lot of people enjoy. I wish I had that number. I'll get that number for you, but it's a lot of people that enjoy that. And that could be taken away. You could show up at your favorite spot, if this took effect and they sold that land, you could show up at your favorite spot and all of a sudden now see a no hunting sign. And trust me, Caden said it. A lot of people, this is how they recreate. They're not some big game hunter with a lot of dough and can travel all over the world or go to a special place or pay for some special access. These are just our fellow citizens who know the value of public land and want to use it. And, I've been on some of these trails like the Pacific Trail and seeing, you're up there doing your thing and they're up there doing their thing. And that's the beauty of public land. And why would you just arbitrarily sell that for a few pennies when the parliamentarian basically said there wasn't an economic, value of you're not getting anything for this proposal.
Wonderful. We'll go ahead over to Brady with Idaho 6.
Hello. I just wanted to ask if you could expand a little bit on the idea that if this goes through and some land gets sold, that this can be a pretty slippery slope. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I don't know. Mayor, do you want to take that as far as your area?
Oh, Senator, the Boise mayor had to hop.
Okay. What the mayor was trying to explain is that she's got a big plan, obviously, for the city to continue to connect to those public lands. You could say the same in parts of Seattle, where all of a sudden something that was part of a public BLM land would be sold out from under you. It could be a slippery slope where they tried this year and now they try something else the next year. The fact that Burgum said at this interior budget hearing last week or 2 weeks ago now that basically he thought of public lands as a balance sheet. We were trying to argue at that moment, we hadn't seen this proposal, that the tools that we did in the Great Outdoors Act was literally saying that you should spend the money that we've dedicated out of the budget for land and water acquisition, that these programs are established for acquisition, not going in the opposite direction. And that he was proposing that, and then we saw 24, 48 hours later, this proposal. So it shows you that this administration is thinking about public lands in a whole new way that we do not agree with. We think just the opposite. We should be doing acquisition. We should do preserving these public lands for the great resources. And as I mentioned in my earlier statement, we're talking about, $1 trillion sector that is very beneficial to the U.S. So you can't argue that somehow selling this land is going to bring some economic value when it already produces great economic value for our nation. And I do think during COVID, I think we saw even an uptick in that. and people wanted that. And we certainly tried at the 100-year anniversary of the parks to say, let's upgrade our facilities so we can have even more economic activity. So where does this cuckoo idea come from? I guess from a real estate president who all of a sudden thinks that these are up for sale. Well, it's no Teddy Roosevelt idea, I can tell you that. And it should be, we should be calling them out on the other side of the aisle. Stand up and be counted and say you are against this concept because you believe in the value of public land as the beautiful crown jewel resource of our nation.
Wonderful. We have time for one more question if anyone wants to hop in with the raise hand function.
We need somebody to ask Tommy a question. Like, we need to ask somebody. Somebody needs to ask Tommy something.
I mean, I could just jump in if nobody's going to ask me a
Yeah,
question.
I was going to say, if not,
Yeah.
any closing thoughts from Tommy or Senator Cantwell would be fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious for an economist to look at this issue because it just doesn't really pencil out. Like, I don't understand the financial value. Do we even know how much stands to be made from these land sales and how that would affect the federal budget?
Well, that's why it's a swindle writ large, because the parliamentarian basically determined that selling the required 3 million acres would have a severe impact on real estate markets and values in the West. That means whatever revenue generated from the land does not outweigh the harm that it would mean in selling the land. So to those communities. So it's kind of like the parliamentarian already zoned in on these are high value and used for high value. And as the mayor was saying, a strategy probably for a larger, way to open access. I mean, that's really the issue, right, Tommy, is like, we all go to great distances to enjoy these places. And what we're really trying to do is open up more access so people can in a broad range of communities have immediate access, and then to have the kind of access that that Caden and others were talking about, where people might travel all the way across the country just to experience that unique thing that they don't have access to in their community. So the access question is really important, and so people build whole strategies off of it. And I would assume there are whole sections of California that you've seen who build strategies off of this economy that is access to public land. And so when you start fooling with it, then and what if they want to keep going? Like, this may just be the camel's nose under the tent, and they want to keep going. And so for what? Why would you sell this resource? You're not going to get it back.
Yeah. I mean, my closing thought, I guess, is the representatives voting for this are in deeply red, oftentimes, places, because that's where BLM and National Forest land is. And that's where I spend the majority of my time. And so I feel like they're really, they're going to change the character of the places they care the most about. And it's really their constituency that's going to suffer the most. So.
Yeah, you're curtailing the opportunity. Most communities in the state that I know, very, you could say they maybe vote, in a conservative way, but they usually come to see us to say, how can you increase this activity? So, for example, Lewis County wants to increase the connection between Mount Rainier and Mount St. Helens. They want us to improve a road that would give people the opportunity to easier get to those two destinations. And they told me they were even advertising in Los Angeles and San Francisco at the airports, telling people to come to Lewis County so that they could enjoy these great vistas that we have. So I think you're right. I like the outdoor economy because it's like just add water, right? Like, it's already there. All you have to do is add the advertising and voila, you have people who come. But we all know that it's great for our well-being, and that recreation has this additional balance to all our lives. And why would we want to shorten that in our rural communities that have such precious resource?
Yeah, and then my one additional thought is almost everybody agrees that we love our public lands. This is so bipartisan. like I think this just doesn't make sense to go through, because everybody I talk to, everybody in my community, even the legislators that are voting the other way, basically agree that this shouldn't happen. So let's make it not happen.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thanks everybody. If that's it, thanks everybody for participating. We'll follow up with more details and information. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Record.